So like the title of the video says, we're going to be covering Awakening on Amara. So this is kind of an interesting skill in that it doesn't actually do anything on its own. It simply buffs other buffs. And long story short, honestly, it can be good sometimes. It can be bad sometimes. And there's a little bit of nuance to when it's good and why it's good. The first thing that I want to kind of exhibit though is a little bit of weird thing that I found in the UI. So if we take a look, Awakening increases the rush effectiveness of all of our rush skills, right? So we have three skills that this will buff. That is Alacrity, which buffs reload speed, Do Harm, which buffs action skill damage, and Violent Tapestry, which increases our status effect chance. So the kind of weird, interesting thing that I found, at least it's a little buggy, is if we take Do Harm, we take Violent Tapestry, we take Alacrity, um, notice the actual buff amounts. So Do Harm stacks up to 4.5% per stack, Violent Tapestry stacks 3% per stack, and then Alacrity is 4.9 if we have the full buff. And a lot of what I've done for testing and for some of my spreadsheet work, I have been using the full amount, not the 2%, but the 4.9. So just keep that in mind when you're seeing some of these numbers. So we see these percentages. If we come down to the actual Awakening buff, it'll show a 10% increase. And that should affect all three of these skills. So I'm going to go ahead and put all 3 points in, and we'll notice that it still shows 3%, still shows 4.5%, still shows 4.9% if you add those two together. So this percentage doesn't immediately show on the UI. However, if I close the UI and I open it back up, we can see that this has jumped to 5.9%. This has jumped to 3.9%. However, Alacrity remains at 4.9%. It's nearly impossible to check the Alacrity percentage increase on reload speed because of its nature, its diminishing return. I'd have to do like frame by frame analysis with like a massive and I've done a lot of testing already. So I'm not 100% sure on Alacrity if it is being affected by Awakening or if this is possibly just a UI bug. There is a lot of UI problems in this game, so I would say it's probably a 50-50. It could be a UI problem or it could really not be affected by Awakening. So just keep that in mind when you take Awakening for the purposes of Alacrity. Now I did do theoretical math to show what it would benefit even if it did work properly. But just know that the UI will reflect Do Harm and Violent Tapestry, but it does not show Alacrity in either case. So we've got all that. Additionally, we can gain Avatar down there, and that will help us with any sort of rush stacking build. So the reason why I took this, because a lot of this is going to be theoretical, I did want to show something. And I have shown this before a little bit, but we'll talk about it here because it's very important to the subject of rush stacking. Phase Zerker grants you the max rush stacks whenever you use an ability. If we put on Phase Grab right here, and we just point at the ground,
Silence.
we can stack our buffs without actually hitting anything or fighting anyone. So we can pre-stack if we know we're going to be fighting something tough, or we know we want a certain amount of dot chance, or whatever the case may be, we can pre-stack these buffs all the way up to 99 by using Phase Grab. Now that being said, it is a bit of a pain in the butt to switch back to Phase Cast if you're using Phase Cast or whatever, so just keep in mind it is a possibility to infinitely stack using Phase Grab. So now that we kind of got that out of the way, we've covered the basics of what Awakening kind of does. So what Awakening does is it increases the percentages that these rush buffs give us. Now the question really becomes, is it important? Is it enough? Is it worth the 3 points? Because there is a lot of stuff that is very strong. Fire rate, increased damage from everything, and gun damage, all kind of vying for these later tier points in the skill tree. So you really have to ask, is Awakening worth putting points into if it's taking away from gun damage or all damage or fire rate, charge speed, that kind of stuff? And I would say probably very rarely the case in most situations, but we're going to talk through every possible situation. I'm going to try to move quickly because I know these videos tend to run long, but I do want to be thorough. So I'm going to go ahead and pull over a spreadsheet that I created. This should speed things up quite a bit. So let's go ahead and take a look. We'll start at the top. Alacrity, that's going to be your reload speed buff right here. Oops, let's see if I can keep it up. There we go. So we have Alacrity. I use the Magnificent. This is a very long reload gun. It has 3 separate magazines, so I wanted to kind of pick something with a very long reload speed so we could see the maximum benefit reload speed could kind of give us. So it had a 6-second reload. This is the base, so we don't have any additional reload speed. We don't have any time saved. That's what this row is going to be, time saved. And then our gain from Awakening will be here. So with just a standard fast hands, just 3 points into fast hands, which is this skill right here, we gain 19%. So that's actually not bad. It's pretty decent for 3 points. But we can see that under Alacrity, if we just get 20 stacks, which with a Phase Zerker avatar kind of build is very easily maintainable, very easily. We see that we have a giant percentage of reload speed. So we effectively get almost 100% reload speed, which should cut our reload in half. And that's only at 20 stacks. So keep that in mind. With Awakening, it jumps up to 130%, 125%, which shaves off an additional 0.4 seconds. This is our gain from Awakening down here. So we gain almost a half-second reload speed if we have Awakening at low stacks of Alacrity. That being said, once we jump up higher and we get into like times 99, which is pretty unreasonable to keep up all the time, but for the sake of argument, we're going to include it here. You gain almost 500% reload speed, and then if you have Awakening, it jumps up even further, 630%. So our reload speed has jumped from 6 seconds down to 1 second, and in the case of Awakening, less than a second. Now, note that we are reducing it by 5, and you're only getting a 0.2 second bonus with Awakening here. So, and also keep in mind that this is on an extremely long reload. Magnificent has a very long reload compared to most weapons. Most weapons are going to be around 2 to 3 seconds. Some heavier weapons like rockets and stuff. So this is only going to be good in the case, at least at high stacks, for very long reload weapons. Most things, this little this 0.2 would actually be more like 0.05 or even 0.1 second increase. And it's just not going to be worth it at high stacks. So the moral of the story on Alacrity is going to be that at low stacks, Awakening is a pretty decent increase, but because reload speed has naturally diminishing returns, at higher stacks, it's not going to be as useful. So let's go ahead and move on to Do Harm. So Do Harm increases our action skill damage, and I wanted to, I won't say easily, but I could very reliably create a scenario where I could test exactly how much this is doing to make sure it worked properly. And this in-game amount are the amounts I was actually hitting for in the world. Now, when I did my testing, I used a Shock Phase Cast, which had a base damage of 6845. My map modifier was negative shock, and my enemy target was flesh, so I was only 65% as effective. Now, I actually wanted both of those things in my testing, and I had to re-roll a couple times to make sure I had the shock down. The reason why is because you'll notice once we get into like the 10,000 range, in game, it doesn't give me accurate numbers anymore. It simply gives me 12K, 15K, 30K, 50K, whatever it is. So in order to get more accurate numbers for longer, I took as much damage down as I could. So in game, when I hit a dog, a skag with this, it did 2225. Now over here, I calculated out that if I take 6845, I multiply that by the flesh modifier, and then half that because of our shock down, then I end up with, whoops, 2224.6, which is rounded up to our base damage. So I was able to ascertain the correct amount with math, so I was able to create this entire math column to figure out how much damage I should be doing if the UI is correct. And it was. Across all of them, they basically rounded properly. Now here, I only ever saw 12K, so it's not actually 12,000 is what I saw. I saw 12K. So this 137 never shows up, but I believe these are probably correct because all the other ones are very accurate. So getting into, is Awakening worth it? Well, essentially what we can see is Do Harm at 20 stacks is giving us quite a buff. It's almost doubling our action skill damage. So from here you can see it goes from 2224 to 4226. Now down here with Awakening, this is Awakening with 20 stacks of Do Harm, it jumps up to 120%. Now the Awakening versus the base amount is a 27% increase, but the Awakening versus without Awakening is only 14%. So what this number compares is these two numbers versus each other, right? Over here, this is comparing these two numbers versus the base amount. So what you'll notice is that versus the base, we're going to get a lot closer to our like a big nice number. This number over here should never exceed 30%. Now, the reason why it's only 14% is because Awakening doesn't buff the base amount of damage. It only buffs the Do Harm portion. So that percentage only goes into Do Harm, and we're only getting about a 15% net increase over what we were doing. However, once you get into bigger stacks of Awakening, a much larger portion of our damage, this 12,000, of that, 2,000 is the base damage, and then 10,000 is the buff damage. So you'll see we get a lot closer to the 30% increase than we would expect from Awakening. So at high stacks of Awakening, it's actually the opposite of Alacrity. At high stacks of Awakening, we get a much better return for our points spent on Do Harm. So let's go ahead and jump into Violent Tapestry. Now, in order to kind of ascertain whether or not this one is effective, we have to kind of look at different types of guns. So I wanted to pull in a low dot chance, a medium dot chance, and a high dot chance weapon. We have the Hellwalker in this column, we have the Westergun in this column, and we have the Firestorm in this column. So the Firestorm is a Maliwan sniper rifle. It has almost half, it has 50% chance. So we're going to expect to see massive returns out of that. However, if you look down here, once we get to high Violent Tapestry numbers, we're exceeding 100%. Dots cannot stack in this game. So what that means is effectively all of that percentage is wasted. So Violent Tapestry can give us some consistency, especially it's really nice at lower amounts. If we actually increase this to 25 stacks, instead of 20 stacks, you'll notice we get up to 100%. So at low stacks, it makes all of your high dot chance weapons very consistent. But if you're stacking any more Awakening, it's pretty much completely useless. Like, it does nothing for you over here, so I would recommend putting fewer points into it. That being said, if we jump over to low dot chance weapons, it does give us an actual, basically a chance to apply a dot. At maximum effectiveness, we could get up to 20% on a Hellwalker, which is normally only a 4% chance. So 1 out of 5 is a whole hell of a lot better than 1 out of 25. So on low dot damage weapons, it can help with dots. However, usually those weapons don't have extremely good dot damages anyway. So Really, the sweet spot for Violent Tapestry is going to be your medium dot percentages. This is going to be your Wester guns, your recursion, projectile recursions, stuff like that, and you want to jack up the awakening as high as possible. So we can notice that the Wester gun has a base percentage of 19. With low stacks, we can get that up to about 1 in 3 instead of our 1 in 5 chance. At high stacks, we can almost attain a 100% chance to apply dots. And this is really strong for SMG type weapons if we have like wildfire and stuff like that, where we can spread the dots every time we shoot. So the moral of the story for all of these is that it really depends on what your build is going for. Alacrity is only going to be good at fewer points into the skill or at lower levels of buff stacking, of rush stacks. So Alacrity is not going to scale super well with Awakening. Um, so just keep in mind Awakening's only useful at lower levels. For Do Harm, Awakening is really good, and the higher you stack your buffs, the better Awakening becomes. Down here, Awakening is kind of useless for high dot chance weapons. For low dot chance weapons, its return is nominal at best. It can help a few weapons get a little bit better, but overall it's not good for low dot chance weapons either. For medium dot chance weapons, recursions or Wester guns or things like you're trying to bump them up from like the teens into like the 50s, 30s, 40s, it can be really, really useful. So Awakening is really best in slot for medium dot chance weapons for any build trying to stack Do Harm for action skill, or with an Alacrity build where you're not using Phase Zerker or Avatar and stuff like that, where you can get to 99 stacks. Alacrity can really benefit from Awakening. So if you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, let me know. I tried to make this as easy and quick as possible. There's a lot of numbers involved, and Awakening is a really complex skill that's sometimes beneficial, but not always. In any case, thanks for watching.